earlier?
Let's start.
Okay. We are very happy to welcome such a distinguished panel and participants at our event. We will start with both of our ambassadors addressing our roundtable, and then I'm sure we'll have a very fruitful discussions addressing both the wider topic of the world order and the COVID-19 pandemic influence on that and BRICS issues, but also looking more into Russian-Indian relations and what our two countries, our pillars, I believe, strong pillars of today's world are to bring to this world, to make it stable, to make it predictable, to make it safe for all, and to make it livable and good to live in. And that said, we will obviously introduce everyone later on, but now allow me to give the floor to His Excellency Nikolai Kudashev, the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Russian Federation to Republic of India, and he will give his video address now.
Friends, Miss Victoria Panova, Mr. Nandanuni Krishnan, distinguished participants. I highly appreciate your kind invitation for this important event, which is extremely timely in the context of global developments and our common attempts to manage the foreseeable future. The proposed agenda items of today's discussion are therefore vital. We are very satisfied with cooperation with India in the bilateral format, as well as in the framework of BRICS, especially amid the Russian chairmanship in the grouping in 2020. The COVID-19 outbreak brought a lot of changes in our life, and this is a challenge for the international relations as well. Against this background, it is particularly important that the principles which represent the basis of our special and privileged strategic partnership remain unchanged, namely mutual respect, commitment to the central role of the United Nations, etc. Together, we are moving towards just and equal multipolar world. That is why our interaction continue growing even during the pandemic. Uninterrupted is the dialogue between the leaders, ministers, national security advisors, and senior officials. The visit of Defense Minister Rajnath Singh to Moscow for the military parade on June 24 on the Red Square, which was dedicated to the 75th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet Union in the Great Patriotic War, also demonstrated true friendship and camaraderie between our peoples. We enjoyed exceptional cooperation against COVID-19, including by supplies of vital medicine and mutual support on repatriation of stranded nationals. 2020 is a very special year in our times. We celebrate the 20th anniversary of the strategic partnership between the two countries, the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and the creation of the United Nations, witness the Russian chairmanship in BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and RIC. Thus, we have an extended agenda aimed at widening our practical cooperation in the new conditions. At the same time, as we speak about the future of the world order, it is equally important that it should be based on international law and clear principles of the United Nations Charter. The COVID-19 threat represents opportunity to unite efforts against the common challenge, and that is why the relevance of BRICS is growing. offering platforms for dialogue on a wide range of issues of global and regional cooperation, as well as practical partnership between the 5 nations. BRICS was not invented to fight or contain anyone, rather than to support efforts of the international community on the issues related to peace and sustainable development, democratization of global governance, financial and economic architecture reform, promotion of humanitarian contacts. At the same time, we are against any unilateral, geopolitically motivated actions and illegal extraterritorial sanctions, which create instability, mistrust, and unpredictability. This shared approach is vividly materialized in our growing coordination in various United Nations bodies, G20, East Asian Summit, OPCW, and other structures. We proceed from the understanding that search for the unifying agenda and the expansion of the common ground to find solution for global challenges will remain a priority for us. Today, when India is preparing to take over as the United Nations Security Council non-permanent member for 2021-2022, there are increasing expectations that we will further enhance our coordination within BRICS on the current international agenda. We believe that moving towards these tasks, we will approach the upcoming summit of BRICS in St. Petersburg this autumn with solid achievements and plans, which would lay ground for the coming Indian chairmanship in the grouping in 2021. Today's conference is a very important event in our tight calendar for this special year. I would like to wish the organizers and participants a fruitful discussion, providing for a comprehensive assessment of the prospects of our bilateral and multilateral interaction, which no doubt will further increase its importance as a crucial factor in world affairs. Thank you. Dear friends, Miss Victoria Panova.
Thank you, Your Excellency. That was an enlightening speech indeed. And this would be our great honor and admiration to hear a welcoming address from His Excellency Mr. Venkatesh Varma, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of India to the Russian Federation. Mr. Varma, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon and greetings from Moscow. Dr. Panova, His Excellency, my dear colleague in Delhi, Ambassador Kudashev, dear friends in India, from the ORF, Dr. Sami Saran, Nandan Nune Krishnan, and of course our friends here in Moscow. And it's good to be here on this very important topic as we look forward to working with Russia as the chair of the BRICS for 2020 to see how we can strengthen the hands of the host country to ensure a successful BRICS summit when that is held later this year. The foreign ministers of BRICS countries will be meeting in early September in Moscow, which will give the ministers an opportunity to review ongoing developments and see how we can strengthen the core principles of BRICS and adapt BRICS to the new challenges that have arisen, which we've all witnessed during the course of the year. And I must say, India and Russia cooperate in several international fora, the UN, and we thank Russia for the support that it has given us for our non-permanent seat, which we will occupy between 2021 and 22. And we look forward to working with Russia to make our presence a success. In the G20, in the SCO, in other forums, we have common interests. But I think whatever our engagement in multilateral forums, the resilience of the strategic partnership bilaterally, I think imposes on us a certain responsibility to ensure that our participation adds value to all the multilateral organizations that we participate in. And I'm absolutely confident that the solidarity that the strategic partnership between India and Russia provides an anchor around which a lot of other multilateral activity can take place. So essentially, what I'm saying is that despite all the forums that we engage in, our bilateral relationship, as far as India is concerned, occupies primacy vis-a-vis Russia. I completely endorse Ambassador Kudashev's comments on our bilateral relationship and the agenda for the future. Let me focus my comments on what we can do in the context of BRICS. The BRICS came about with a promise to make a difference. And I think this time around, there will be an expectation both amongst various BRICS countries and of course the international community on whether BRICS can live up to that standard, because the global yardsticks of assessing the viability and relevance of international organizations has sharply risen because of the very complicated international situation. We've seen that in the context of G20. Everybody agrees that G20 in 2008 was a huge success. Its success in 2020 in addressing the pandemic appears, well, we'll wait and see. We don't want that same question mark to arise vis-a-vis BRICS. So with respect to the pandemic, I think there are a couple of ideas that we need to address. One is the importance of national resilience. And there are very interesting parallels between how India has approached the COVID pandemic and how Russia has approached. And I think mutual sharing of experiences and lessons learned, I think, is something that we can look at. Yesterday, we had a conversation through video conference between the medical devices manufacturers of India and Russia. This is a practical aspect of cooperation. And of course, medical devices industry has boomed globally, but India and Russia have special capabilities and talents in this regard. And we saw a lot of commonalities. So I think opportunities which are not generally visible in normal circumstances, I think extraordinary circumstances and times bring forth new opportunities. And I think we should look for that. Secondly, I think there is an interest in avoiding over-dependence on old and comfortable supply chains, which of course don't suddenly seem to work when they are most required. So I think an exchange of views on that is also important. Thirdly, the concept of international responsibility. When you're faced with an international crisis, of course, it is necessary to protect your own interests, but that protection of your own interests should be the basis for you to handle to contribute to the international situation. I think all of us who travel in airlines, the air hostess always tells us that when there is a drop in cabin pressure, the mask will fall down from the ceiling, and the first priority is to put it onto yourself, so that you are not entirely for selfish reasons. I think it's necessary for that you stabilize yourself first before you are in a position to help others. That I think is absolutely necessary. We also need to define the global good, because I think the global good comes into sharper focus when situations such as this arise. And I would say that the BRICS should step forward because its original promise and its original charter, at least internationally, was meant to make a difference to the world. And now the time has come to see how we can make a difference. Now, for example, I think we should agree on how reform of the multilateral institutions can be accelerated, could be made more purpose-driven. The WHO is a good point in example. Is a good example. We all agree that the WHO plays an important role, but obviously there is need for reform, and I think we should come up with our own expectations, which we can bring to the larger international community, on how WHO reform can take place in a more purposeful, more purposeful manner. Similarly, the definition of the global good, I think, will come up for a very important test when these various vaccines that are being developed in different parts of the world, and we look forward with great interest as Russia makes progress. We are making progress in India as well. But whatever these vaccines, I think the definition of a global good is something that we will need to that we would need to see. Recently, the India and the EU had a joint statement after the summit level through a DVC, and I think there were some important yardsticks there. Let me also say that BRICS also has unique characteristics in terms of global outreach. I mean, we are from truly different continents, different areas. And I think each of us from our own region needs to reflect the larger interests of our own region. India took a major step forward as soon as the pandemic began. I think our Prime Minister went forward and conducted and organized a SARC get-together of leaders to see how we could coordinate and help each other. That was an extremely positive development. So BRICS, as in BRICS, I think needs to put together the interests from Africa, from Latin America, of course, from Asia and the Eurasian region. Lastly, I think we congratulate Russia for keeping up their BRICS dialogue. The BRICS commerce ministers will be speaking shortly, despite all the complications that the world has witnessed with respect to global governance. At least the conversations have continued. And I think that is an absolutely important aspect of global governance. Conversations must continue. And I think Russia, in its chairmanship of BRICS, has contributed, and we'd like to thank them and wish them all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You've touched upon very important points, and I believe we will need to address all of those. And indeed, you're right, BRICS was introduced, was there to make a difference. And we are hoping that we're still relevant for that. And that is why, while we've achieved significant progress in a number of areas, it is vital not to stay where we are. We saw that their current pandemics have in fact exacerbated all the existing problems. Instead of seeing everyone look into the common good, into their joint future, take the humanistic approach, we saw the world, most of countries that have to be taking the lead, going into national egoisms and instead showing them not ready for such leadership and showing they're not ready for leaving their needs behind, but rather addressing the common good. And BRICS, while we still need to see what BRICS can make, how BRICS can make a significant change. Yes, we do have a very intense tissue of cooperation that's happening so far. You rightly mentioned all the mechanisms and all the meetings that were held for now within the BRICS. There are a number of issues that were taken upon, including in the area of healthcare, and definitely WHO reform is a very important agenda, and BRICS is there to keep up the reform of the multilateral organizations and actually to ensure their credibility and their usefulness to the world. And that is why we cannot just be calm and happy because, for example, yet in 2018, we talked about the vaccine center back in South Africa. We still don't have it functioning. We're talking about all our countries developing vaccines. And it is true that we need to take more actions to ensure faster and better cooperation in these and other areas. Among those, I can name one of the initiatives that we came up with as experts was their joint education of tracers in their situation of pandemics between the BRICS. And obviously, it is very important that BRICS is there not to only show the lead and to improve the quality of life of their own populations, but also to show the way and improve the situation of the regions where all of our countries are seen as leaders. Without further ado, I would like to first of all say that my fellow co-chair today would be Mr. Nandan Unnikrishnan, Distinguished Fellow of the Observer Research Foundation. We are very much looking forward to seeing him back with his video on once his internet connection improves. But now I would like for us to further move into the agenda and start the first part of our today's meeting and the session, which would be addressing their emerging world order with how the COVID-19 influenced it, how the BRICS can be helpful in order for this world order to be in the interest of the developing world, of not just our 5 countries, and how to manage all the turbulences and the crises that were exacerbated, as I said earlier, with the help of our 2 countries and the BRICS in general. And that said, I would like to give the first floor to Dr. Sergei Lunev, who is a professor of the Oriental Studies Department of their GIMO University, and he will give us his view on what we are here to see further on.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak to such an enlightened audience. In my opinion, the repercussions of the pandemic are not seen clearly now. Some experts began to make forecasts about the end of globalization. I am not so sure about it. The same situation was a dozen years ago when the world economic crisis began, but nothing really has happened. On the other hand, now we have the second wave of the economic globalization. The first one was more than 100 years ago, and it was stopped by the First World War. So the results of this pandemic can be different. The creation of polycentric and multi-civilizational world seems to be the main way of modern world. Previously, the basis of civilizational differences and intercivilizational contradictions were mainly due to social, religious, and cultural factors, but not to economic ones. Nevertheless, it is the economic parameters that have played extremely significant role in the current change in the global development. With the exception of information globalization, economic globalization has developed most rapidly in recent time. It is not so with political globalization, not to say about civilizational globalization. This process was caused both by transformations in national economies and in the world economy, and by political reasons, for example, by the liquidation of the socialist camp. Economic globalization, by placing specific countries and social groups in more favorable conditions and making the situation of other countries worse, has aggravated social problems throughout the world. The social wave of protests cover all Western Europe and the United States, and the COVID-19 has complicated the situation. We can, in my opinion, only expect an increase in social protest, especially when we take into account that the Western labor market doesn't demand now qualified personnel. It requires almost exclusively unskilled workers and highly qualified workers. The transformation of the world system is a complex knot of intertwining economic, socio-economic, political, and geopolitical problems. Members of the world system, on the one hand, are forced to adapt to these processes, and on the other, to change them in their own interests. Of course, only countries with huge potential can change these processes, and Russia and India are among these countries. I am not a diplomat or official serviceman. That's why I'm a freelancer. So I'll not smooth things over and being tired of quarantine, I try to be absolutely frank. The West has been Russia's traditional enemy for 500 years, starting with Ivan IV's Livonian War in the 16th century. After the end of the bipolar period, the strategic goal of the developed countries in relation to Russia was to maintain the status quo. They needed a weakened country, but not chaos, the development of raw materials industries, but not high-tech, the dismantling of military power, but at the same stage, not final. The United States, of course, also sought to eliminate Russia's independent influence on world events. Frankly speaking, the USA is the most aggressive power in the world. I know that in India you used to say about the aggressive foreign policy of China, but please name any war that China began after 1979 and the war with Vietnam. If we speak about the United States, we'll name a lot of wars, and the millions were killed during these wars. After Russia rose from its knees, the positions of Western political forces that wanted to destroy the country completely were sharply strengthened. The European Union, while remaining an economic giant, is becoming a political dwarf. Its only strategy is to follow in the footsteps of American foreign policy, which in general leads gradually to the deprivation of their status as important actors in foreign policy. European powers can only slightly deviate from this position in the case of the American policy of unilateralism, as it was during the first term of George Bush Jr. and under present President Trump. India is undoubtedly the world power and has become a special subsystem of international relations. This formation, yes, absolutely the same can be said about China. And this formation seems to have been accelerated by the collapse of the world socialism. In a controlled world, this process would have met with much greater obstacles. In the near future, Asian giants may become rivals of the United States in the fight for leadership. History repeats itself. Rivals appear on the periphery, but whether India or China can become a leader depends on the interaction of many factors. Less likely candidates for the status of a global center of influence are Russia, Brazil, the European Union, and Japan. For the United States, the following factors are potentially dangerous. 1. Asian giants do not belong to the privileged part of the world economic system, which means that they are not happy with the rules of the game imposed by the developed countries. And second, an independent foreign policy has always been the main goal of China and India, and subordination to anyone doesn't fit into their plans. The hegemony of the West is rejected by these countries for political, economic, and civilizational reasons. This situation, in my opinion, explains the external paradox, India's active participation in the BRICS format. If the bilateral Indo-Chinese relations are characterized by a very large number of problems, and the basic one is the lack of confidence in each other, then, on the contrary, there is a noticeable Indian-American rapprochement. It is the global level that turns daily away from the USA towards BRICS. The BRICS countries are outwardly the main global force that opposes the transformation of the world system into a monopolar one. I'll be absolutely frank. In my opinion, Brazil and South Africa are weak companions of Russia, India, and China. Brazil considers itself a part of the West, and the vast majority of Brazilian population considers so. And Brazil's presence in the organization seems quite ineffective. South Africa is on a downward path in economic terms during the last 30 years, and its potential doesn't match the Eurasian powers. Unemployment, poverty, and equality in this country are among the highest in the world, and the real economic growth rate is very low. Thus, we must either return to the RIC format, and I am a great fan of this format, or invite either major non-Western countries, Mexico, Argentina, Indonesia, Iran, Nigeria, some other ones. Within the framework of BRICS, there was a focus, first of all, on the coordination of actions in the sphere of the international economic relations. Meanwhile, a new intensification of economic and political cooperation within the framework of the RIC is also quite promising. Thus, it is interesting to combine Russian fundamental science and resources Indian engineering, and Chinese material production. The obtained product, in my opinion, would have a big market. It may also be promising to establish joint activities in such areas as the agrosphere, joint development of mineral, fuel, energy, and forest resources in Siberia
Dr.
and
Lunyov,
the
you will
Far
have
East.
2 minutes more.
Okay, maybe I'll speak about it not so short in the second part of our meeting, but I'll name, in my opinion, the main key negative factor in Russia-Indian bilateral political relations. It is the psychological perception of the elite of their partner. During the third wave of Indian migration, a powerful Indian diaspora was formed in North America and Europe that occupies a rather privileged position in the new homeland. Among the Indian elite, there are almost no individuals who do not now have relatives or close friends among American citizens. This situation has led to the emergence of political leaders in India, calling for focusing exclusively on Washington, which may lead to the destruction of a half-century-old consensus on foreign policy. Russian elite is also pro-Western, not pro-American, but pro-European. The Russian elite still firmly believes in the Eurocentric ideal model, has an obvious inferiority complex in relation to Europe, and is traditionally extremely pessimistic about their own country, which has always led to real cynicism, was in Tsarist period, in the Soviet period, and now. I am sorry for speaking too long. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lunev. We're sorry. I'm quite sure that it would have been great to listen to all our speakers for much longer, but we do have limitations on time. And particularly now, allow me to, without further ado, to give the floor to Dr. Samir Saran, who is the president of the Observer Research Foundation. And not only that, but he's been our long friend in both BRICS and in Russia-India relations. And we've done a lot of really great things and launched lots of initiatives together. And he's always been a very reliable friend, and I think one of their most prominent political scientists and analysts globally, who is always very interesting to listen to his insights and in quite a few areas. And that is why we're really looking forward to your comments and your speech now, Dr. Saran.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Nandan, for organizing this very important conversation at a very important juncture, as both the ambassadors have highlighted in their intervention, and as Professor Lunev has already, in some sense, expounded on. Let me make 4 very short points, because I don't want to take too much of clock time. I think the big world order questions that flow from the pandemic are not necessarily connected to the pandemic. They are questions that have been exaggerated and placed before us rather brutally due to the pandemic. So I think these are lingering issues which have come to a head around this moment when we are coping with the health crisis. The first big question that this pandemic has posed before all of us is who is going to be the underwriter, the custodian of the world order. Whether we liked America or we hated America, the fact was Americans spent a lot of their treasury, they spent a lot of their political and military force in keeping the sea lane safe, in keeping order in trade, in ensuring technology was available and accessible to many around the world, in creating a stable financial system that allowed money to move, in ensuring the flights reached on time, in ensuring the telephone calls never switched off, even during a bombing raid. So we can criticize them, we can like them, we can dislike them. That is a personal belief. But the world order for the last 20 years, at least, ever since the end of the Soviet Union, was underwritten by American power. What the pandemic tells us is that America was absent as the world was responding to this crisis. The absence of America from a global crisis is the first in my lifetime. I've never been in a global scale situation where Captain America has disappeared. The aspirant to Captain America's throne, Captain Xi Jinping, was incriminated in causing the crisis. So we have one powerful country which is away from the crisis and is staying outside the crisis and is creating a mess for their own people. And we have a second big power that is incriminated on how the pandemic scaled up and reached all our shores. So we have the top two countries both being shown in very poor light courtesy the pandemic. And this is in many ways the challenge the world order faces, that one doesn't want to be the most powerful country in the world, the other is not ready to be the most powerful country in the world. So how do we create an undergirding? How do we create a club of a coalition of countries that will provide stability, safety, prosperity, and peace in these most challenging times? And therefore, countries like Russia and India, and the partnership between Russia and India is extremely crucial to help us tide over this uncertain moment where the G1 has left and the G2 is not ready. And therefore, the bilateral becomes extremely vital. We will have to invest more in it. We cannot continue to do what we've been doing for the past 10 to 15 years. We have to now become far more active in creating solutions, not only for the region we occupy, but as both the ambassadors mentioned, for other geographies as well. So that's the first world order question. The second issue is that even as the world reaches an uncertain political moment, we are also seeing upheaval in its economic assumptions. The old assumptions around economics are no longer going to be valid going ahead. As we enter the fourth industrial revolution, as technology becomes the most dominant driver of economic value creation, as manufacturing is replaced by 3D printing and becomes a service, as distant retail and bits and bytes produce more value than the movement of oil and energy, we will all have to reconfigure our own economic models and therefore our bilateral relationships. So while energy and minerals and raw materials will remain an important part of the potential between India and Russia, I think the sky is the limit if India and Russia put together a partnership of the future where we become brother in arms to build one of the most sophisticated fourth industrial revolution frameworks, where the distance of geography, the tyranny of geography is removed, where Vladivostok and Bangalore can co-create the most formidable IT and ITES and Internet of Things based economic framework. And I think that potential is huge. So I think we have to also understand that in this economic upheaval, there are new opportunities, technology, but there are also huge challenges because some of those old economic institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and the central banking institutions, the currency management exchanges, the commodity management exchanges are all going to become redundant. A whole new economic architecture for the 21st century is still to be built, and it is important that Russia and India become partners in this project that will involve many others to put together an economic framework that is durable for the future. I think that's the second world order question that we need to start thinking about. The third is trade and technology. I'm going back to technology, but in a different context. I think the assumptions that globalization is liked by everyone and global trade is meant to bring prosperity to every person is certainly not a view shared by many national leaders and nationalistic leaders, and certainly even non-nationalistic leaders. I think global trade is facing its biggest threat in the last 30 years, since 1990. I think this is the most challenging time for global trade, and not only because the WTO is possibly going to collapse, but also because the idea that we can have shared trade that benefits all is not necessarily a virtue that many cater to. And I think this is an important point to understand, that the model of globalization going ahead is also up for grabs. We will have to recast the assumptions around globalization together, and India and Russia have a role to play in this, whether in the format that you mentioned, Rick, whether bilaterally or whether through larger plurilateral groupings like SCO and BRICS. But the fact is globalization is at its weakest. And if globalization as a project has to survive, it requires radical energy and radical reform. And that's something that we need to be thinking about. So these are my three big world order questions: a new trading arrangement, new economics, and new politics that is likely to flow from the pandemic. Let me give you three more concrete and practical ideas and then close. That's my fourth point. We can do three things together in more immediate and practical terms, which are essential for our people, our country, and of course, the various partnerships that we have together or individually. I think the first is that can Russia and India partner to ensure the vaccine that we build, the medical protocols that we record, the treatments that we discover are available to all? And can we use our partnership to ensure the vaccines you create and we create and the medicines that we build, that we have, are taken to the last miles in Africa, in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world? And I think India-Russia partnership for responding to the health component of the pandemic could be something different. Our relationship is normally seen as a strong relationship around defense and security and energy. I think let's bring some human-focused, people-centered endeavors into our relationship so that our relationship becomes more popular amongst our people. The reason why our people are more distant than our elites are because our elites are more focused on security and energy and economics, while people, for the people, SDGs and health and other issues matter more. So if the Russia-India partnership can transform to include elements of health and economy and human capital and issues that matter to people, it can become a more popular relationship in both our countries, in our cities, in our states, in our provinces, amongst our different communities. So that's the first idea. The second, of course, is that we are all going to have to recover our economies next year or the year after that. Once this crisis is past us, or even while we grapple with the crisis, we have to create a stimulus package. Can we work together through the New Development Bank? Can we work together bilaterally? Can we work together through international institutions, financial institutions? Can we create a basis, modest maybe, because we are not either China or Russia or the US, sometimes partnering with one, sometimes with the other? Can we build a framework for recovery? Can it be a recovery that is sustainable? Can it be a recovery that is gender-led? Can it be a recovery that makes us achieve our 2030 goals as humanity? So can we create ideas? Because we are thinkers. You are thinkers, we are thinkers. Both of us have spent more time thinking than doing. That's why the Americans and Chinese are bigger economies. But can we as thinkers put together frameworks that can be popularized? And I think that is something that we need to think about, an economic recovery. The third area that I want to put together is around this is the time as we start working from home. All of us have begun to realize we don't need visas to work for each other. The Russian fear not to have too many Indians in their territory can now be dispelled. Can we have Indians working out of India for Russians, for what Russia needs in its service sector, in its accounts, in its legal services, in its various other businesses? So I think the work from home and the social distancing allows us a new moment to use the demographic complementarities that we had, but were never able to exploit. Can we create special skilling programs that will allow Indians language skills and commercial skills to serve the Russians? By the way, this is happening with UAE. It's happening with Dubai, where this has happened. We have signed an agreement where our Indians are trained in Indian skilling institutions to cater to their needs. So can we think of our human capital and our demographic complementarities anew? I think this is the time to do it. The digital moment gives us this possibility. And finally, I think my last input for this is that we need to be realistic about what we can do together with China. I know Professor Lunev says that China has never attacked anyone since 1979. Let me remind you of one incident, 15th of June, 2020. So very recently, China has attacked someone, has moved into our territory, has moved 40,000 troops into a land that they believe is theirs, but we claim to be ours. It has tried to use force to change the political geography of the Himalayas. So to say that the Chinese are not going to exhibit American characteristics is foolhardy. I think let's be a little realistic about what we are dealing with. The China that was promoting BRICS in 2009 is not the same China who is trying to change the geography in 2020 in India. Let's be realistic. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not even asking you to walk in my shoes. It's difficult. All I'm saying is let's keep our minds open. that the BRICS project was based on sovereign equality. It was based on the fact that the smallest economy like South Africa and the largest economy in the BRICS like China would have equal votes and weight in a new development bank. It was based on the fact that we will respect each other's dignity and sovereignty. Is the premise that created BRICS still true? And I think as we move to this new decade of BRICS, 1 year into the new decade of BRICS, that question needs to be asked. That do we still believe that we are all equal? Do we still believe that we all have same sovereign rights and weight and vote? And if that question is answered in the negative, then there are limitations to those groupings. If that question is answered in the positive, then that grouping has a future. The challenge before us is that can we keep BRICS relevant in this new decade when one of the members may have changed their mind on the basic underlying principle that allowed BRICS to work for 11 years? And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Samir. Very emotional, very pointy, and I know there are a number of questions, especially for you specifically. But if you stay here for some more time, if you allow, we would have Lydia Kulik and Suhasini Haidar speak, and then have a wrap-up questions at the end of this session, so that we can have a more general discussion. But you're very right. It's actually vital that we do address not just hard security economic questions. I'm going back to the first part of your speech, and it is vital to encompass for both Russia and India the fourth industrial revolution, the new technologies, and is definitely for us in new impetus to think not only technology-wise, but also how do we go around this technology? Because what you mean, working distantly, how do we introduce new legislation in our countries? For example, you know, there are discussions in the G20 on their digital payment methods to be discussed, and we had the State Duma discuss in its third reading the legislation on the digital methods of payment in Russia, how they are addressed, and this distant working of Indians for Russian companies, or of Russians for Indian companies, also would require some new legislative thinking, new economic thinking for us, not just technology. And I think there is a huge area for us to think. And obviously, in today's world, if we want to keep up with their current pace, we need to do it together. There is no way that we can reach something in isolation. We can have a breakthrough in some smaller area, but as soon as we come up to a more general breakthrough, it needs partnership. And in fact, very briefly, you've been discussing economic financial terms, and one of the BRICS areas that we still need to discuss, and it's there on the agenda, is how we use all our national currencies to trade in BRICS. Because now we cannot be relying just on some currencies that are not necessarily there, be it because of sanctions, be it because of other reasons. So there is a drastic need for us to make a leapfrog in that area. I would ask now give the floor to Dr. Lydia Kulik, Head of India Studies, Kolkova Institute of Emerging Market Studies, and also Research Fellow at the Center for Indian Studies of the Institute of Oriental Studies of Russian Academy of Sciences. I would like to ask to keep short so that we can have a more discussion, maybe 5 minutes. Dr. Kulik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak, and thanks for organizing this discussion. Special words of greetings to His Excellency Ambassador Sharma and Nikolai Rishatovich Kudashev. And it's great to see so many distinguished speakers here great to see Mr. Saran speak so emotionally, and Dr. Lunyov, thank you so much for your points. Looking forward to Mr. Unikrishnan speaking and Dr. Shulman as well. It's really hard to add much substance after very extensive speeches by the previous experts, and I would like to be brief, and it's not very difficult to be brief after so much important points have already been covered. I'm agreeing on some of them, and I would allow myself to disagree with some of the points that were raised earlier. First of all, we see after the pandemic a lot of regional forces of local gravity pulling international organizations apart. And we see these forces are stronger than ever. Many countries, including Russia and India, are speaking about self-reliance. Experts are discussing issues pertaining to deglobalization, whether it has a chance or not. Then, of course, there is US-China rivalry, obvious to everybody. But at times like this, BRICS is being tested, but at the same time, a BRICS format has an extra chance to prove its necessity. And in this respect, may I say a few words of appreciation to Dr. Victoria Panova and her team, and to the entire National Committee on BRICS Research, and the government agencies supporting this work for a lot of efforts that are being put into revising the agenda of BRICS, making it relevant, preparing various events. And I'm very hopeful that despite being postponed, they will take place, and they will set the new benchmark for the work of this association for the future. Another point that I would like to make is that there is a lot of criticism around BRICS, and this criticism is derived from the fact that each member state of BRICS association has its own goals in this forum. And of course, being very close to India, we understand that a lot of criticism is coming from our Indian friends towards China. We hear that BRICS is used by our Chinese partners for its own agenda. And while these points to some extent may be valid, I would call on the expert community and the media in India to exercise a little bit of more caution in terms of this very sensitive issue of China and India rivalry, because while this being a very sensitive issue, and I'm concurring with the Russia's official position about not taking sides in this, very emotional engagement, I would like to draw everyone's attention that by stressing the negativity around this relationship, we're playing into the tunes of our Western partners. It has always been their agenda to clash India with its big neighbor on the north, with China. And I would just call on everyone not to beat these drums of war, because they are playing into the hands of exactly the forces that we're trying to oppose by keeping BRICS stable and relevant and working. Russia's strategy within BRICS has always been to search for and strengthen the elements of common interests and common value for all member states. And of course, Russia has been playing a very harmonizing role on all tracks of BRICS work, be it political, economic, or humanitarian. And there's been no more relevant partnership within BRICS than Russian and Indian partnership, and the entire construction of BRICS rests on a lot of positive outlook about how multipolar world should look like. And it should be this way going forward as well. Another point that I would like to make is that post-pandemic, the relevance of United Nations sustainable goals is much more high, and UN declaration signed in 2015 specifying this 17 goals has never been more acute and more important to many people, most of the people of the world. Of course, we're talking about healthcare, poverty alleviation, digitalization, climate change. I could see when I looked at the revised version of BRICS economic partnership strategy, a lot of relevance to what the pandemic has highlighted even further. And of course, we're talking about digital transformation of the economies, developing cooperation in digital sphere, and overcoming the digital divide, developing e-commerce, e-government. All the points that Dr. Saran has already highlighted are all reflected in the economic partnership strategy for BRICS, and the pandemic has only brought new importance to all these points. These are also the priorities for Indian-Russian cooperation as well, which again brings us to the fact that Russian-Indian partnership is extremely relevant to BRICS in general. Maybe it would be new to our friends in India, the fact that digitalization and IT is now one of the priorities for the Russian economy. And even before the pandemic has hit in Russia, the new Prime Minister Mishustin has been appointed, who is well known for being digital savvy. He is famous for reforming and transforming the Russian tax service, making it efficient and digital, and probably even before digitalization has come on the front stage of everyone's minds following the pandemic, the Russian government has had this agenda in mind, and digitalization is definitely one of the priorities for our country at this particular moment, which brings another idea which Dr. Panova has touched upon, but I would like to develop it a little bit further. As we enter this new stage where the borders are non-existent, where a lot of issues are solved by artificial intelligence, and there is Internet of Things, etc., etc., both on the level of civil society, of individuals, and on the level of countries, associations, it is time to think about the new rules of these digital games, and not just within our own societies, but on a general global scale. Countries have to think about forming the new rules of play. At the moment, we see complete lawlessness. It leads to a lot of problems, chaos, confusions, accusations, and BRICS could have a much stronger say in setting the rules for this new digital world, which we are all, approaching, and which we are all hoping to make good use of for the benefits of our countries and our societies. Just another brief point is about the new development bank in BRICS, which has been a success. It has been accepted, by international financial experts. There are nearly 50 projects now under financing of this bank. And again, under the influence of pandemics, probably more emphasis will have to be put on innovative technologies and cross-border projects that are uniting the BRICS member states, not just projects focused locally. Another point that I would like to make is probably everyone in Russia wants to see India's role in BRICS as higher, as more involved, while looking out of India, probably BRICS is not very high on Indian agenda. Let me just give you another example to say a few words of caution and cautious optimism. It's not just about BRICS that India is very cautious about. Generally, India's involvement in all international association has been rather limited, while India is open to membership in many international fora, partly due to limited resources, partly due to its own interests. India's involvement, for instance, in the British Commonwealth, which I have studied, closer than other associations, has also been, rather limited, and the agents behind these associations have always wanted to India to play a bigger role in associations like this. At some point, please don't consider this example as irrelevant, but at some point Britain even wanted India to be the chairman of the Commonwealth, of the British Commonwealth, which sounds rather strange, but because India has so much respect in the development world, to give more credibility to the entire associations, the driving countries, the driving member states behind these associations may want India to play a greater role in, in this fora, but it has always been India's policy to pursue its own interests and to probably take care of its business interests, its expertise before the political interests. And while I'm also calling on Indian government to play a greater role in BRICS and give it more attention, at the same time, we have to be quite realistic. And it is not that India is forgetting BRICS, but it is just has never been a tradition on the Indian side, on the Indian behalf, to be extra active in forums like this. But I hope, of course, being on the Russian side, that BRICS will occupy a special place in the Indian foreign policy and in the hearts of common Indians as well, as Mr. Saran has mentioned. We have to, promote the agenda that would reach common people, that that would help, make BRICS relevant for them, not just for the, for the government, but for elites. And here I hear the concern of Dr. Lunyov, but there is no conflict in some of the elites in India being very Western focused. It is very natural. It is, the way of life. It is the commonality of business interests and English language. But some elite in India, of course, hopefully would be Russia focused, that would know the country better, that would develop business links with Russia. And we're all, of course, working towards, bringing more and more of such role changes in India and in Russia. And let me just finish by a few words by our Prime Minister Sergei Lavrov, who called BRICS a natural association and the association that was inspired by the realities of life. He also called BRICS as one of the pillars of more just and democratic world order that is being built right now. And on this optimistic point, let me conclude by saying that naturally the trends of the changing world calling for multipolarity would, bring our countries closer to each other. They will gravitate them into the sphere of BRICS rather than into the regional small islands of, self-reliance and independence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kulik. And I should say that you've been talking about digital as an important area to deal within BRICS, not just bilateral relations. And I should tell you that now we are, our officials are talking about adoption of the new strategy for economic partnerships of BRICS for the new period of 2025. And we are hoping, and it's highly likely, that we're going to have a special section. It will be one of the 3 sections that would be devoted specifically to digital economy. So this is high priority within BRICS. And another point I would like, there are some other projects that are also discussed between the 5, both in security and technology, in economy, and also social impact of digitalization. So it's very important. You're very right. And off top, before giving the floor to our further speaker, I'd like to say that you could see that our today's roundtable is a perfect gender equality. We are having exactly the same number of speakers from both male and female, and I think this is also very timely, and because we saw quite a lot of news which was saying that those countries or those entities that were led by women who have empathy are offering best solutions to pandemics. But I do not personally believe in this particular suggestion. I would suggest that it is in the parity and in the balance of both male and female in our expertise and our strength that we can make a breakthrough and win over the difficult situations. That said, allow me to introduce the next speaker of our first session, Mrs. Suhasini Haidar, who is a national editor and diplomatic affairs editor of The Hindu, the most prominent newspaper of India. But I should say that she's also been a very prominent journalist and worked on TV as well. And from what I know, Dr. Haidar is always listened to very carefully, and all her analysis, all her articles, all her evaluations are read carefully in their government of India, in their intellectual and political elite of India and Russia, those who, and that is why we're very much looking forward to hearing her insights in this particular session. Ms. Haidar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for your very kind words and for inviting me to speak over here. The fact is that sometimes it is crisis that clarifies one's priorities. And I think that the crisis that the world faces today, the coronavirus pandemic, is something that is going to bring clarity in what our priorities are. In a way, it is a forced pause for a world on steroids. We were moving so fast, we were moving quickly on so many fronts that in fact the last 4 to 5 months, 6 months for some, have actually forced people to stop, listen, think about what it is, what is the world that we have created, and what is the world that is going to emerge after all of this. In that sense, we are all today in this webinar as well in a kind of waiting room, waiting to find out what is going to emerge. And I think the BRICS question is just one of those. I don't think we can take it for granted that BRICS is going to continue. You know, it has always emerged as a sort of a surprise for many, because it had been written off practically the moment that BRICS as a term had even been coined 20 years ago. And since then, we have seen the cynicism that has followed about what does BRICS really mean? What do these countries have in common? Can they really forge anything close to a consensus, or is it just lip service they pay? So the fact that BRICS has always outlasted its critics is something, again, that we do need to think about. The first part of what I'd like to talk about is the kind of geopolitical factors that are emerging in this crisis, which will decide the world and also the relevance of organizations and multilateral arrangements like BRICS. And the second, really, what then should the priorities be? But I'll try and keep it very short. In terms of the geopolitical, and Dr. Saran has already spoken a little bit about the idea that we are being torn between two so-called world leaders who have not really shown the world great leadership during this pandemic. Neither has China, where the pandemic seems to have arisen, apprised the world fast enough, or told the world what to expect, or given leadership at that time. And neither has America, either by example or by its leadership to the world, shown us that they have actually, in some way, contributed to the world in the middle of this pandemic. So what we do see in the absence of, shall we say, very inspiring leadership from the two global, the number one and number two when it comes to the economies, is the need, the pressing need once again for the role of multipolar, multilateral arrangements and the shift towards a multipolar world. We heard the External Affairs Minister, in fact, speak just yesterday, Dr. Jaishankar, where he actually said that the US needs to now step out of the alliances that it has gotten so used to and really think in terms of the multipolar world and engage much more in a plurilateral sense. I think what he's saying is coming literally from a kind of almost, it's almost like a centripetal force that is telling us that this is not going to work. I don't know if the world is going to be better, but we know that this one is not working right now. So I think in that sense, BRICS, Russia and India particularly, are going to need to do that much more to push the idea of these multilateral arrangements, as well as to talk about the various communities, because of course BRICS is a very unusual community, you know, across all these continents. But there are communities, regional communities, subcontinental communities that are going to need to be pushed in terms of special purpose alliances, trade alliances, technological alliances in particular. And I speak from an Indian point of view and a South Asian point of view. All of you who are scholars on India know that South Asia tends to be a term derided very much in our intelligentsia. But at the end of the day, when it came to the coronavirus, in fact, South Asian populations had much more in common in terms of the spread of the disease, in terms of the challenges they dealt with, in terms of the economic challenges we now deal with when it comes to things like the migrant population, in terms of the digital divides. So the need is now to identify those communities that are going to take us forward. I will say in this that the relevance of BRICS is going to be called into question for several reasons, but the particular reason is, apart from the rivalry that we have seen between the two world leaders, is a real push in the world towards the buffet rather than the a la carte option. I'll explain that. The idea now is that no country, regardless of how independent they think they are and how autonomous they think their strategic thinking is being allowed to take decisions just purely in their own interest. The way the world is today, we are being actually told that we have to choose. Where do we have to choose? We have to choose on defense. You either take this platform that involves all these various countries and builds coalitions between them, or you have to take the other platform. In telecommunications, the world is being polarized, and let's be honest, this is about Huawei and Chinese technology in 5G. But the fact is today that there are costs to either choosing a certain technology or to not choosing that technology, or to rejecting that technology, and both will come with great costs. And I don't think we can ignore either side of that. When it comes to energy, we're being told again that you have to choose where you get your energy from. Let's not forget, even a country like India that prides itself on not listening to any third-party sanctions, only UN sanctions would be followed, ended up having to zero out its oil imports from a country like Iran because of the US sanctions. And so we do see this kind of pattern that you have to choose one platform or another platform. You are not any longer being allowed to use what is in your best interest. An organization like BRICS would have to actually break through that kind of paradigm that the world is moving to. And I think it really is just a question of the survival of BRICS as well. Because in the post-coronavirus world, I don't think we are going to have the time to be part of any number of organizations that don't actually value add at a time of strained resources and at a time when each country is really occupied with their own resurgence, with their own economic recovery. I think the third question being asked is really the UN versus what? You know, every century or so, the world does ask itself, do we need a new world order? It was asked in the 1830s when Lord Tennyson came up with the idea of Parliament of Man, because colonizations and colonials were being no longer seen in a positive light around the world. In the 1940s, in fact, because of the World War and all the destruction that was created, then we saw a new world order emerge. But at the end of the day, we all know that that new world order was not a fair world order. It worked. It has worked for 70, 80 years to a certain extent. But we also know that it was not representative of the entire world. It left out entire continents. It left out countries with some of the world's largest populations. It left out so much of humanity. So we are going to have to move towards the idea of this new world order. What is BRICS' role going to be in it? Given that the countries that make up BRICS also make up so much of humanity, is there going to be a greater push from the two BRICS members who are actually a part of the old world order and the UN Security Council to make this a more fair new world order? And I think that will actually decide the relevance of the organization to the other members who are involved in that. Finally, and I have to say this as a journalist, the coronavirus pandemic has thrown up questions of how we will deal with democracy and whether democracy will just be about winning elections or will actually mean about talk about more rights, more personal liberties, and the other dream that democracy has given people. I say this with concern because I think just the physical restraints put by the coronavirus has meant a lack of an opposition, protests around the world, journalistic freedoms, national security being made, being put above any other concerns over privacy and surveillance. And I think we are going to have to look at this. I don't imagine that the BRICS countries really have a counter to this at present or would even want one, because we do live in a world where most governments would actually be all right with a system and where such rights are not necessarily pushed. But I think that it is necessary to talk about them, because if we are going to move towards a more human-centric growth in the world, we are going to have to think about it. So very quickly, the kind of patterns I think that BRICS must prepare for. The first has been spoken about so much, the problems with globalization, and as a result, the global supply chains. Today, we're being told not to have global supply chains that depend on any one country. Of course, it is a Western construct that we must reduce our dependency on supply chains coming from the East, most notably from China. But the whole question will have to be asked about whether the new, the counter to globalization will be a more regional one. Will it be more community-centric, and what BRICS will, what kind of role BRICS will play there? I think we do need to talk about and have, and I hope that the next BRICS summit will bring about a real conversation on the future of work, because consumption is not going to repeat, is not going to be like it was before. We are not year on year necessarily going to increase our consumption of consumer goods and other things that the economy, especially emerging economies that make up the BRICS, do depend on. So what is going to replace that? In the midst of this kind of worry about each of our countries and a kind of, if I may say so, xenophobia in them, what is going to happen to migrant laborers? I know Dr. Sarin suggested that we are going to have new ways of hiring people in different parts of the world, but particularly in India, and I'm sure in other countries, we are worried about what is the future of migration going to be, and what is the loss of the remittances from our migrants going to mean for our economy. All our speakers have spoken about the necessity to look at energy again, low prices right now, but so will there be a diversification towards renewable energy? In a sense, all of us have seen the benefits of having the coronavirus lockdown, the impact on our environment. We've all seen cleaner air, cleaner water. Are we going to be able to, in a sense, preserve that? And what we are going to do for climate change? I often say this, that for the moment, SDGs have become about social distancing goals, but sooner or later, we will have to return to the idea, not just of the sustainable development goals we've already put in place, but the new ones, which will need to marry technology, which will need to marry biotechnology, even space engineering, in order to stop future pandemic. So I'm going to leave it over there. There is a geopolitical moment here. There is an opportunity. I certainly hope that BRICS will be the organization to take up that opportunity. And I hope to keep this conversation going.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haidar. We do have lots of questions already coming to us all the ways. Here was only one, but there are many more. And before we proceed to the other session, allow me to at least ask the speakers to briefly respond to at least, like, let's say 2-3 questions, or maybe one of their choice. So the one that you all can see is about their, despite that all the similarities between the countries, the progress of the format remains limited. Even the sites dedicated to BRICS initiatives are largely covering the events rather than show tangible results. Ms. Shavlai mentions education, which is overlooked, and so ask what particular steps are taken to improve the situation. And it's well known that all the BRICS members lack specialists on the corresponding countries, and so ask what could be the BRICS contribution to changing the situation. We have a couple more questions coming from our audience on YouTube. One is probably would be directed to Russian ones, saying that in view of the current situation between India and China, how can Russia respond to enhancing and protecting common BRICS interests if the situation breaks down more? Or maybe if Indian colleagues also want to comment on that, that could be good. Another one was on mentioning, Dr. Saran mentioned that during this pandemic, US is awake, and we say that the fall of US has started. So, and probably the last one, if you'd like to respond, even multilateral world is hierarchical, like in the past with bi or unipolar worlds. What is the place of Russia and India in it, and what role our relationship can play in that order? The other questions, but for the sake of time, we will be asking to respond to them later. I know that Dr. Saran has to leave now, so I'd like you to comment very briefly. Your microphone, please turn it on.
Okay, so I'm going to respond to 2 questions, and I'm going to respond to the question Dr. Kulik did not ask me as well. So very short. First, I think the pandemic is a great opportunity to put together knowledge hub where all of the BRICS countries can share their treatment protocols, can share their city management experiences, can share their use of technology and deployment of various applications, can create a repository of solutions, not only for each other, but for the world. I think we are doing this in any case on a larger scale through the WHO and other organizations. But if we were to create a BRICS knowledge hub around the pandemic, and since the pandemic is going to be with us for the next 18 to 24 months, I think this will be a truly important BRICS initiative that will make it more popular with people who otherwise think BRICS is a government-to-government relationship, which is meant to do big talking and does not affect our daily lives. To make BRICS more popular, let's bring it down to the people and let's do a pandemic knowledge hub. And Victoria, I'm happy to work with you to set this up, because we've been doing this at ORF. In any case, we have a Corona tracker. Please go to our website. I'm plugging for it. So that's one idea. And I think we could do this across sectors, but let's start with the pandemic and the health sector. The second response is on the US decline. I think the relative decline is unmistakable, but it is still, like Suhasini mentioned, the largest economy in the world, and which has the greatest capacity to implicate global events. And therefore, to suggest that the US is not one of the most, if not the most important global actor, is perhaps premature. The question here is, does the US imagine itself as a global power? And I think that is the larger question. What is its own self-identity today? What is its own self-imagination today? I think that is something to be seen, whether it was only for this particular administration or will it remain the same once November comes this year. So I think that's on the US. And finally, on Dr. Kulik's point, I am not beating war drums, nor am I trying to play into the agenda of anyone else. I do not believe that American C-17s carried the Chinese troops to the Indian border. It was not an American conspiracy. The Chinese did not use American transportation vans either. They came on their own. So it was not an American ploy to send 40,000 Chinese troops to our border. Certainly, we are not, we met, I think the foreign minister did come to the RIC meeting. Suhasini would confirm that he attended the meeting in spite of this border standoff. So we are not distracted from our global commitments, even as we respond to this bilateral situation at the border and respond to the pandemic at home. Now, you may have seen less enthusiasm around the BRICS in India over the last 3 months because we are trying to save 1.3 billion Indians. We have a slightly bigger challenge than most countries do, courtesy our population and a per capita income of $2,000. So we are trying to work with the smallest resources to create largest safety nets for our people. It is not an easy exercise. It's a quite messy democracy. But let me tell you that there is no dampening of enthusiasm. In fact, I told Victoria that don't worry, when India becomes the think tank lead next year, we will invite Victoria to co-lead that particular year so that the Russia-India bilateral can play out over the BRICS. We will work together next year in the real, and we will have Russia present in all the events that we do, taking a leadership role so that we make up for this year when we could not do too much together in the beautiful city of Moscow and Sochi and many other lovely towns that you have. So we are committed to BRICS. We believe in the BRICS, but it does not detract from my central question. BRICS was based on sovereign equality. Has that fundamental underpinning changed? BRICS was based to oppose hegemony. It is not to support one kind of hegemony and resist another kind. I am certain that as a BRICS, we are not going to replace the US as a hegemon with some other hegemon. The idea was to have a multilateral, multipolar, equitable global system, and we must continue to chase that dream and aspiration, even though, as Suhasini will continue to remind us, that no world order has been fair. We will continue to live with unfair world orders, but we should not give up the hope of trying to make it relatively better. And I think BRICS was meant to be that change agent that makes the world relatively better. It was not supposed to cure the world of every problem. It is not going to be able to do that, but it should be able to give world more choices and more options. And that was the purpose of BRICS. And I hope we continue as BRICS to provide those options, treat everyone equally, and work on the principles of equity and equality. So I will leave you now. Thank you so much, Victoria. And I'm so sorry I'm being rude and leaving. But Lydia, I loved your comments.
Thank you, Samir. And I think BRICS, I can assure you that we will be here staying on this very important principle of sovereign equality. Otherwise, you're very right, BRICS or either other organization where India or Russia or other BRICS countries would be part would not make sense. So we are adhering to this principle, and I'm sure all the 5 members are adhering to this principle as well. Thank you so much. Very briefly, Ms. Haidar, there was one specific also for you, just if you could say 1 minute, how hopeful you are for the new world order when things are not changing on the ground. That's in brief.
Well, I can only say that the current crisis is making people, and particularly the next generation, rethink everything they knew, not just about order and laws, and but about leadership itself. And if that leadership fails, and I do agree, we are in a very peculiar situation where we have these 2 supposed world leaders today who are heading into, shall we say, a Cold War. And in them, we have one who seems to see their rise only through a sort of military and strategic perspective, and the other who seems to be trying to counter that by retrenching. So we have the rise of one power, the retrenchment of the other, and the rest of us will have to step up to the plate. So the answer to that question is that it is for everyone who does not aspire perhaps just for leadership for themselves, but for leadership for global values, to step up to the plate now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haidar. Dr. Kulik, also 1 minute comment, if you could, either of the questions that were asked, just pick the most dear to you.
Thank you. Probably the most interesting one is about the US-China relations and the fact that both India and Russia probably should distance themselves. This is the opinion of most of the experts who speak on the subject, and should not, get involved into this rivalry. And second point is I would just generally question the idea of previous speakers about, China's world leadership. Although, of course, this country has gained a lot of, progress and achievements, etc., but it has not aspired yet to be the world leader. And while the US is stepping down, China is not just being prevented from becoming the next leader, but it is not yet taking its, responsibilities or claiming the responsibilities of the world leader. And probably China scholars would, could clarify this better, but it does not have the ambitions of, leading the world. Let's, of course, we can argue whether China is still, subscribing to multipolarity and just and equal world order, which BRICS is an embodiment of, but I would still suggest that yes, and it is in Russia's and India's responsibility to step in while this rivalry is unfolding and to provide an alternative, which we're at this moment discussing and which we're trying to shape up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kulik. Dr. Lunev, if you allow me, I will now give the floor to my fellow co-chair, Dr. Unikrishnan, because I know that you will be speaking at the second session also, so probably you could also address all the questions at the second sessions as well. And I would like to thank you all the speakers that spoke so far for all the wonderful, brilliant ideas and insights. And I wish we had more time. And I'm quite sure that once we meet face to face, there will be, and I'm quite sure we'll do it at least, if not this year, which I'm still hopeful for, but next year for sure. And we will discuss all those matters that are relevant for both of our countries. Nandan?
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you very much. I, at the outset, would like to say that you'll have to tolerate a far more authoritarian and Stalinist chair. I am not as liberal as Victoria is, so I am going to enforce the time limit. And some of you...
Very nice for a change, That's Indian influence on me.
So as Tatyana Lvovna and Nivedita surely know that I will enforce the time limit very strictly. I will also hope that Mr. Lunyov will participate in this discussion during the question answer session at least, because of his wide knowledge about Indo-Russian relationships. Without further ado, I would request Tatyana Lvovna, Dr. Shauman, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. You hear me, yes? I hope. Thank you very much. I am very glad that I have an opportunity to participate in this discussion, and I can see here my very good friends, my old friends and my new friends, and that is really very important things which we are discussing today. And many aspects of the Indo-Russian relations in the context of the coronavirus was already discussed, and two of our distinguished ambassadors were talking about that, and our distinguished participants also mentioned the Indo-Russian relations in this context. And therefore, many all already had been covered. But I would like first to remind that we are talking today about very serious and very, we can say, the tragic things, because we did not mention now the victims of this coronavirus in both our countries. And I am afraid that the number of victims, more than a million people already covered. And therefore, when Dr. Saran was talking about the different aspects of India-Russia relations, and of course, our partnership has a lot of components, that is politics, that is defense, and that is nuclear energy, anti-terrorism cooperation, that is space cooperation, economic cooperation. But of course, we should very seriously include in this list the problems of health. And now we have this opportunity, we should do that. And we should discuss about the cooperation in health and cooperation in medical science. We should cooperation in medical technological subjects. We should cooperate in medicine, because this new situation gave us the opportunity, gave us the necessity to maybe to include this aspect of Indo-Russian relations in the agenda of our meetings and of our politics and our economics cooperation and so on. And I would like to say a few words about some real influence which had these new conditions in the context with coronavirus on even on our India-Russia relations, even on our sphere of our relations. And we know that, I think that in other situation, we could meet personally. We could have our meetings, we have our seminars, conferences, and so on. But in such circumstances, we should maybe not to cancel that meetings, but to postpone them, or to have it in such a form as we have it now online. And we planned in our institute, in our Center for Indian Studies, maybe you know, of course, that we had every year in May, end of May, the conference devoted to the India studies, our Indian studies and India-Russian relations and political aspects of our relationship. But this time we postponed the conference. It should be on 21st, 22nd of October. I don't know in which form, frankly speaking. Maybe it would be online or it would be in personal participation in that. But I think that this is important. I think that because of this coronavirus and many aspects of our life was changed, and on the level of different levels of our relationship. I think that very limited contacts on the level of even on business, and even this our scientific exchange now suffering because of this. And I'm not talking about tourism, which tourism now, I don't know if it's still survive or not, but in such a circumstances, it is it's very situation is of many changes, and also the what kind of situations in the institutions, in the universities, at schools, because
Tatiana Lvovna, 2 minutes more.
yeah, okay. And I think that in the India and Russia relationship, very important in the our common efforts to fight against coronavirus. I think that it is very important the effective cooperation between India and Russia, and not only on bilateral level, but also at the level of international groups, organizations. And we were talking a lot about on BRICS. Of course, our cooperation in the framework of BRICS is also very important in Shanghai organization, because you know, only common efforts we can effectively fighting against this coronavirus danger. And I think that in this case, we should also cooperate with China, because in all this, in many of these, our organizations, also China is also the member. And I think that in the framework of BRICS, we were talking about that, in the Shanghai organization, I think that we should work together. We could like or we could dislike some things in the politics, some change in the China politics, but we should remember that in this fighting, we should have the common efforts, because it is really very important for the future of our people, the future of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana Lvovna. You've managed 2 seconds below 7 minutes. I think that is remarkable. So I would request all other speakers to follow this course.
Yeah.
And without any comments, I'll reserve all my comments towards the end. I'd now ask Nivedita Kapoor to make her presentation.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'll be focusing on the impact of the pandemic on Indo-Russia relations. So we are all already aware of the fact that the Indo-Russia relationship is a long-standing one. It's a time-tested relationship. And over the past few years, both the political leadership in both the countries has taken steps to ensure that this relationship improves. It has tried to address the various issues involved in the economic relationship, the defense and the energy partnership as well. But what I want to focus today is on the systemic pressures that the international system is exerting on this bilateral partnership. The most prominent of which is the expected heightening of the US-China bipolarity. I would not say that these trends were not visible before the pandemic hit. But what the pandemic has done is either accelerated some of these trends that were already exerting pressure on the Indo-Russia bilateral relationship, and in some ways, it has heightened some of those other pressures. So as a result of this US-China bipolarity, there's an increasing sense of the polarization in foreign policies of other countries as well. And because a clear bipolarity has not emerged, a clear multipolarity has not emerged either, but the post-Cold War US hegemonism does not also work very well at this stage. So in this state of confusion and in this state of flux, it is only natural that the Indo-Russia bilateral relationship is also it will also have to deal with certain challenges that this situation will present on the bilateral relationship. And here I'll highlight the China factor, because China is an important factor in the foreign policies of both India and Russia. For Russia particularly, China has become important in the post-2014 period, and we have seen a qualitative shift in the relationship of both of the Russia-China relationship. Similarly, if you look at India, we have looked at rising China. We have been concerned about an increasingly aggressive China, especially when it comes to the region of Asia. And that has led us to focus on our foreign policy in a way where we are getting closer to the United States and other regional powers of Asia. So while the China factor is affecting foreign policies of both India and Russia, it is affecting those foreign policies in very different ways. And it is this situation that both the countries will have to address. But in this changing world order, I would like to stress again that both the countries need each other. So if I argue from the opposite point of view, what if India were to lose Russia as its close partner? Not only will we lose a long time tested friend who supplies us with the latest defense weaponry, we will also be pushing Russia further into the hands of China. Similarly, if Russia were to lose India as its close partner, its relations with the West are already not very well, and it is not a very strong player in Asia as of now. So it will be only left with China as the main partner, and that would be negative for Russia's aim of achieving a multi-vector foreign policy. Also, India and Russia cooperate on several other strategic issues, say on Central Asia, on issues of say counterterrorism, on Afghanistan. We do need to cooperate with each other. So in the long-term strategic sense, India and Russia will have to put a lot of energies to ensure that their bilateral relationship continues to be strong, despite the fact that currently, because of the sort of confusing situation that the world order is in, it might look difficult to sustain the relationship at the levels that it used to be. But it's important to keep the long-term strategic perspective in mind. And this is also important because neither India nor Russia want to get into an alliance relationship with other partners. We both the middle powers want to have broad-based, diversified foreign policy, and for that we need to ensure that our bilateral relationship remains strong. And I'll very quickly also touch upon how this systemic pressure is being exerted on BRICS as well, and how India and Russia interact within the BRICS format as well. We already know that BRICS has done pretty well in terms of institutionalization in the economic and the financial sector. But I remember when Russia took over the presidency of BRICS last year, it said that one of its aims would be to increase the foreign policy coordination amongst the BRICS members. Now that goal seems to be increasingly elusive, primarily because of how the Indo-China relationship has panned out, especially after the recent clashes in the border. It has made India more concerned about Chinese intentions vis-a-vis India and, of course, broadly towards the broader region. And this problem for BRICS is not new, that it does very well on the economic and the financial sector. But when it comes to issues of geopolitical concern, strategic concern, I urge you to go to the BRICS declarations. You will realize that on issues of regional importance, on any strategic issues, the language is very perfunctory. Most the BRICS countries do is they express concern about situations in different parts of the world. While in contrast, if you look at the economic and the financial sector, you can clearly see specific projects that emerge out of BRICS. So it was already clear for BRICS countries that that while they can cooperate on certain areas of economic development.
Nivedita, 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. Strategic issues are a little difficult for BRICS to address as a whole. And I've read several Russian scholars also raise this question as to the fact that how can BRICS become an important voice in international strategic affairs, especially if the Indo-China equation is not smoothened out, because their foreign policies seem to be increasingly diverging. So the question for BRICS now emerges is, if it cannot cooperate on key geopolitical agenda, does it agree to cooperate, to limit its cooperation to the economic and financial sector in order to preserve the unity of the organization? That will definitely limit its voice in the international arena. But that's a question that BRICS will have to address in the future. I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Nivedita. There are several questions which, of course, come up as a result of the first two presentations. But nevertheless, again, as I said, we'll look at all of it towards the end. Well, let me get Alexei Kupriyanov into the conversation and let us hear what he has to say. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, is it okay?
It's okay, it's okay.
Okay, thank you, Nandan. Being the last to speak is terrible because almost everything you wanted to say has already been said by others. But nevertheless, first of all, I want to start by saying that I am not sure that we are now seeing the formation of new world order. If we understand the world order as a system of institutions and general accepted rules. In fact, the previous rules and institutions persist because the United Nations is in place. None of the existing institutions has collapsed. None of the international practices is something new that hasn't been in use since 1945 when the current world order was created. I personally do not see anything new except for the struggles for hegemony between the two superpowers, within the framework of the existing world order. But at the same time, we see the security of Asia, the century of Asia, the center of decline of the West. And this is a long strategic process, I think, superimposed by the pandemic of the coronavirus, which put an end to the illusion of free trade and globalization, and we see the United States-China rivalry. Personally, I see two possible strategic long-term scenarios. I would call them slow and fast. The slow scenario implies a gradual transformation of world institutions toward greater influence of Asian countries. A fast one, a radical transformation as a result of which a new world order will be created, where Asian countries will play a bigger role. In the second option, I think we will inevitably face the transformation of the BRICS into a more institutionalized structure of global governance, because non-Western countries, which play a large role, will increasingly require a platform for consultations. And now BRICS is the only platform where the main non-Western countries can discuss current problems in the club. It's very possible that the BRICS will become a key element of the future world order. In both scenarios, Russia and India are mutually interested in strengthening each other. I think strengthening other influence in order to support each other. In particular, Russia is interested in India getting the seat of permanent member in Security Council so that it's officially recognized as a nuclear power, I think, so that we see not the implementation of the Chinese option, polycentric world, unipolar Asia, but implementation of the option polycentric world and polycentric Asia. In the second scenario, Russia and India will turn into be two main pillars of the emerging world order. In my opinion, the future of Russian-India relations also will be greatly influenced by the rivalry between China and the United States, because Russia and India control the main Chinese lines of communications. In the Indian Ocean, India controls the oil and gas supply line from the Gulf countries to China. Africa-China lane is the route along which Chinese goods go to Europe, while Russia controls the northern route. Accordingly, by coordination actions, Russia and India will be able to achieve the greater cumulative effect. Plus, to all appearance, we will see in the near future, I think, the formation of visible spheres of influence and the use of economy as another field of interstate rivalry. The most important thing now, in my opinion, is not to be drawn into rivalry between China and the United States, because both Russia and India can join it only as junior partners of one of the parties, and this is too risky. China and the United States continue the rivalry would benefit from this, similar to how India, for example, benefited first from the economic confrontation between China and the United States, and then from the beginning of the new Cold War, providing territory for American manufacturers. They are being withdrawn from China. This is the path that allowed many countries to rise in their time during the Cold War, and the path of junior ally can bring advantages, but it's rather dangerous because you risk or sacrifice your interest for the interest of your ally, as happened with Britain during Cold War, or get advantages, but then face your allies in new confrontation, because you will become too strong. So the main goal in this situation is to be aware of your own interest and not listen to those who call to immediately join one or other side. We don't know yet who will be winner. There is no point in gambling your future. And we will strengthen our position if we coordinate it also in the BRICS framework. It's important to consider the impact of coronavirus epidemic on this situation. I do not see that the coronavirus epidemic has damaged or will damage our relationship, but this is a reminder to us to work together to develop a strong develop a system to help cope with future pandemics. Russia and India have medical school, both traditional and epidemiological. Russian doctors have repeatedly helped Indians cope with epidemics, and now many Indians are studying in Russian universities, medical universities. I believe this is a good incentive for the development of relations in this area. This is China is a leading manufacturer of precursors. India is a world leader of pharma, and Russia is a leader in fighting against epidemics. But we interact very weakly within the BRICS. It's so happened historically that in all BRICS countries, there is a large number of endemic diseases and establish a system of combating them. At the same time, at the BRICS level, our cooperation look very weak. For example, recent medical forums were focused on traditional medicine. It's a good topic, of course, but not when is a pandemic around. And you need to understand that this pandemic is not the last. The next one must be met fully armed. And India and Russia should be initiators, I think, in this matter. A BRICS medical rapid response force maybe could be created, including floating hospitals, operating as a BRICS countries and third countries. Soft power is transmitted much better through the medicine than through Bollywood, I think. In general, well, in my opinion, we need cooperation on three main lines, which will determine who will become the leaders of world in 50 or 100 years. This is medicine, education, and high-tech research in various fields, from energy to military. The coronavirus epidemic very well demonstrated the importance of cooperation here. We saw the elites of most states quickly closed their borders and are saving themselves, and few people help each other. This is good for maintaining internal stability, but bad when it comes to finding durable solutions, where the coordination of efforts of several countries is needed. We must concentrate on these three aspects, I think. They might become the main ones. And of course, we must continue expert collaboration.
Alexei, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm finishing. Must continue expert collaborations, academic collaborations in the current era when international structures like the BRICS can either disappear or become the pillars of new world order. It's very important to understand exactly how they transform, how they can transform, and what we want from them. Thank you, Nandan. That's all.
Thank you, Alexei. That was very short and sweet, as they say, and I think also very, very clear. Before I proceed to make some of my remarks, I would like to, first of all, welcome several of the participants who have waited patiently. Particularly, I'll start with the Indians. Vice Admiral Muralidharan, I can see. I see Lieutenant General Arun Sahani, as well as General Ashok Mehta. And of course, I see Professor Yarigina and Artyom Lukin. So all of you, I'm really grateful that you've shown so much patience and waiting and listening to us. Before I move on to the questions, and I have spoken to the organizers, and I'm allowed to overrun for another 20 minutes of time, I wanted to point out that, in this session, what we've really done is we've taken some global issues and some bilateral issues, and we are trying desperately to see if we can get these together. And to me, it appears that there are some things on which we all agree. I mean, one is that the global order is in a state of churn, that the new global order has not drawn itself. And as Alexei said, many of the old institutions are still the institutions through which we are trying to mediate our problems, although everyone, and this is the peculiarity of the current situation, the ex-hegemon, the future hegemon, and all the others around them, everyone is unhappy with the current state of affairs. So one common factor is a general unhappiness, dissatisfaction with the way the world is. That is very good. I don't mean very good in that sense, but I'm saying that is something we all agree on. The second thing is, where does that place India-Russia relations? And this is something I think that we have to be very honest and open with each other about. We definitely differ with each other on how we view China. We definitely differ with each other on how we view the United States. India's perception is governed by the fact that it sees its relationship with China currently in an adversarial atmosphere, although in the long run, the Indians do recognize that China could and should maybe have an important role in India's developmental story. Uh, Similarly, the same is the approach to the United States. The additional factor is that India sees the United States as a significant force that would help balance the rise of China within the Asian space. In fact, now there is a new concept called the Greater Eurasian Space. Uh, the Russians, unfortunately, are in a different situation. They have a long standing, and I agree with Mr. Lunyov, 500-year-old adversarial relationship with the West, which has become a little bit more exacerbated since 2014. Uh, it has forced them to develop ties with other countries. Unfortunately, or fortunately, one of the ties where countries with whom they have developed a very strong relationship is China. And this is where the problem comes into our bilateral relationship. How much can India rely on Russia to balance China? If you go back to the 60s, where our relationship with the Russia, Soviet Union began, and particularly if you come to the 70s, it was very clear that we expected Russia, Soviet Union to balance our relationship with our adversaries, and which was even then, after 62, particularly China. Today, that situation, there is a certain amount of I won't say suspicion, but there is certain concerns about the level at which we can trust each other. Sorry. So it is this question, I think, that we all need to analyze and see further. But more than that, there is an overriding factor which I think is also equally important, that whatever the world order that emerges, be it a G2, be it a multipolar world, be it an asymmetrical multipolar world, whatever discussions you want to have, the point is that the India Russia relationship could be and should be an important axis that could contribute to the stability of the emerging new world order. There are many factors that are common between us, despite some concerns that have cropped up, which could contribute towards creating this new world order. Once upon a time, I was one of the proponents who believed that the new Eurasian order could be discussed. The new Asian architecture could be discussed through RIC. Today, I'm not such an ardent enthusiast about the RIC format because I see a fundamental distrust between two players, China and India. I mean, however much Russia may want us to not be hostile to each other, the point is these the recent confrontation has changed the paradigm in which India-China relationship operates. It is going to take a long, long time to get back to some kind of business as normal. So I think, to sum up, what I'm saying is there are many unanswered questions, and one of those, and the main question there is, how are India and Russia reinvent the understanding of their relationship in an uncertain, evolving new world order? And how do they insulate each other from some of the strategic pushes and pulls that they face in their bilateral relationships with other countries? I mean, and as I said, it's China and US primarily. I don't think we have paid enough attention to these questions. And we seem to think that there is some inherent internal dynamic in the India Russia relationship that will automatically make it float and will automatically make it rise. I don't think so. I think we need to create new institutions of interactions. I think we need to be far more proactive if we want this relationship to survive. Now, with that, I will open the floor to questions. But first, I know that Mr. Lunyov had some comments to make. And so therefore, I will give him the floor, but I will restrict him to 5 minutes. Mr. Lunyov, the floor is yours. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself, Sergey.
Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity you gave to me. I'll be rather short. I would like to speak about this quote: Russia, China, India, and the United States. I absolutely agree with all the experts who said already that the far India and Russia are from the American-Chinese quarrel, the better for our countries. It's for sure. You should also understand my position. I consider that Russia is too close to China. Otherwise, I still believe in the potential of Russia in the China triangle. And I think that Russia is the country that most keen to smooth the relations between China and India, and the United States is the country that the most keen one to aggravate the situation. And of course, Russia has practically no chances to do anything with it, as we should bear in mind that Asian giants are extremely cautious about any attempts to meddle in their bilateral disputes. So the only thing Russia can do is, for example, to inform India about the history of Russian-Chinese border talks. It was said today about the recent situation on the boundary between China and India. I have to recall you about island Damansky in 1969, when 59 Soviet bodyguards were killed and 2 Chinese divisions were eliminated. And now island Damansky is a part of China, but there are practically no voices in Russia against this decision or the border question. So it's necessary to do everything just to give some confidence between India and China. It's my position, and yes, we should think about the words of Arthashastra about your neighbor is your friend, the neighbor of your neighbor is your enemy, the neighbor of your neighbor is a friend. So Russia and India are real friends indeed, having neighbors such as China or the Islamic world. But it will be positive to use the potential of this triangle. I have no time, so I would not speak about the whole Russian-Indian relations. If I have 2 minutes, I'll speak about cultural and humanitarian sphere. It's possible to be rather short about it. If we speak about political, economic, or military political situation, it will take 1 hour, I think. Can I speak 2 minutes about?
Yeah. 1.5.
Thank you very much. You see, it's a very interesting point because we were very close in this humanitarian sphere in the Soviet times, and we are rather far today. And it's a great pity. It's a great pity. It's a problem of absolutely different questions For example, the majority of people in Russia haven't yet realized the threat posed by information wars and information influence. And there is reason to believe that such a war is already being waged against the Russian Federation. In the post-bipolar period, the Russian Federation didn't actually take any actions to improve its own image abroad. Its image for the whole world was formed and is forming exclusively by the West, whose main method was and remains a complete denigration of Russian reality and history. Electronic and print media in the West are striking in their hostility to Russia. There is almost no positive coverage of its policy. All this information is sent to non-Western countries, including India, where the attitude towards Russia is also getting worse. And from this point of view, it's absolutely necessary to do something. There are practically no Indian journalists in Russia. There are no Russian journalists in India. And we see an acute shortage of information. And by the way, these new online methods can give us the possibility to improve the situation. I agree with Dr. Kulik, who spoke a lot about this all digital things, but it's absolutely necessary to make the Russian India mass media to perform its primary function of coverage of events that take place in two countries. And the same about the question with the education. These online methods can give us an opportunity to bring together Russian and Indian, not only scholars, but students and, well, so it will give very good impact upon the whole situation. Well, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergey. I'm sorry to interrupt you like this, but we are really running short of time. If there are...
No, I am just an Indian now. When I began speaking, it's very difficult to stop me.
Now I have one question in my chat box. Since I don't have access to the YouTube question box, so the one question I have here is about the line of credit that India had extended last year to the Russian Far East. That Nivedita will look after. But if Admiral Muralidharan has any question he would like to ask, I'd like to give him the floor. Unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you, Nandan. It's been very, very fascinating to listen to different points of view. Firstly, I would say I agree totally with Alexei when he says, we got to look at the maritime frontier. What he said very correctly, the oil flow through the Indian Ocean region as well as through the Pacific. So these are two areas I think an Indo-Russian cooperation can completely look at this gamut, and it's very, very important. When you look at all that ports that say China is trying to build or the others, the Belt and Road Initiative, all this is linked because, in my view, they're not very confident of being at sea. That is one point. The other one is what I gathered from the conversation and Sergey is, nearly 2 decades ago, I happened to be serving the Embassy of India as the naval attaché. At that time, my Russian friends used to tell me that, we are not hesitant. We are very confident of giving even the latest weaponry and systems to India because you'll never pose a threat to us. But we are a little hesitant to give it to China because we share borders and they could very much be a threat to us. But in today's discussions, and especially what Sergey mentioned, I mean, of course, things change. It's almost 15, 20 years. But there's a subtle change that has happened in the Russian-Chinese relationship. Thank you, Nandan.
Sorry, thank you, sir. And let me just summarize some of the questions that I've seen, and then maybe I could assign one or two of them, and the rest the presenters could answer on their own. The first, of course, was about the line of credit. Nivedita will speak on that. There was a question about the role of, one second, let me look at it again. How India and Russia can improve their relations if they are geographically very separated and don't have any important issues to assist each other, particularly even like Afghanistan. India and Russia are not necessarily on the same page, and India is not very involved there. This question is addressed specifically to Dr. Kolik. Then there is another set of questions. Of course, all of them deal with the Russia-China relationship and its impact on the bilateral India-Russia relationship. And there is one very interesting question is from an Indian academic. What is the state of affairs with the Russian vaccine for COVID-19? So now these two questions, I would suggest the Russian participants divide amongst themselves. Meanwhile, let me start by asking Dr. Kulik to answer the question on India-Russia relations.
Thank you, Mr. Unikrishnan. In fact, these two questions are related, and it was already covered by previous speakers. For instance, Dr. Kupriyanov has spoken extensively on the new frontiers of cooperation lying in the medical sphere, and I totally agree with him. And this is one important area that two countries should explore closer. This is also related to what Dr. Lunyov has said. All the coverage of Russia in the Western media, also reaching the Asian countries like India, is totally negative. All Russia's achievements in fighting the pandemic, in developing the vaccine, are totally neglected in the West, and I doubt that they are covered in the Indian media. At least I'm not seeing much coverage at all. And similarly, we see a lot of negativity about India in the Western media, be it because of Narendra Modi's leadership and a lot of criticism that he's facing, but the entire country is covered in a rather negative light at this particular moment. And the achievements of India in fighting the pandemic are also not reflected if we read Western coverage. In this regard, we have a lot to say, to our BRICS partners and to each other, and to cooperate in this sphere, which is slightly neglected in this particular moment. We know, for instance, that India is very strong in producing vaccines. At this moment, millions of doses of vaccine are already produced in India, and they're just waiting to be approved, and then the market is at least partially satisfied. The market demand is at least partially satisfied with India's production. In the meantime, Russia's fundamental research in terms of infectious diseases and development of vaccines is also quite strong, which are obviously the factors of synergy that could be exploited. There was also a question about Afghanistan, but given very sensitive nature of Indian-Chinese relations this particular moment, I would just say that I'm still hopeful RIC format in terms of stabilizing Greater Eurasia, although there is a lot of criticism and a lot of doubt whether this format could work and could stabilize this very important areas of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia, for the benefit of security for India and Russia. I would say that dialogue is important, and I would agree with what Dr. Showman has said, that it is absolutely essential to keep the dialogue on, and Russia and India could play a very important role in stabilizing Greater Eurasia to each other's benefit.
Thank you, Dr. Kulik. And Nivedita, can I ask you to answer Artyom Lukin's question about the line of credit?
Yes, sir. It's actually a very short answer because as of now, the latest information that I have is that both the sides are still looking at the modalities and they're working out these modalities for the disbursement of the $1 billion loan. But as of now, no Indian company has put forth its proposal to make use of this line of credit. So as of now, nothing has happened on the ground. We are still looking at working out the preliminary conditions.
Okay, then with that, I will try to just in about 2 words summarize what we have been discussing today. We seem to have agreed that there is much change happening in the world. We seem to have agreed that the Indo-Russian relationship has a very solid foundation. We also seem to have agreed that it is necessary for us not to lose this relationship and that we have to reinvent or invent new ways of taking this relationship to another level, to making sure that this relationship contributes towards the creation of a stabler new world. Uh, Now that we have so much in common and a common understanding of where we are headed, what is probably left is for us to, in our next meeting, actually try and flesh out some concrete methods of getting to this goal. Yes, some of the speakers, Dr. Saran, Mr. Kupriyanov, Lydia Kulik, have outlined some of the specific measures that we could undertake to diversify this relationship away from the security and defense aspect and bring in other elements into it, which is also very important. And ultimately, I will take you back to the original point, is that when we are discussing a stable and prosperous greater Eurasia, I think we are all discussing first and primarily from a security aspect. And the Indo Pacific and greater Eurasia are complementary in my worldview. So, therefore, I think we cannot run away from this security aspect, and it is something that we have to address. But I'm sure we will have many more such meetings, and I hope we do have many more such meetings, utilizing the wonderful technologies that we now have access to. And I look forward to seeing you again on this platform or on an ORF platform to discuss further the intricacies of our bilateral relationship. Thank you very much for your contributions, and join me in thanking the presenters.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandan.
It was great round table, I believe. Thank questions coming from YouTube. We've already ran over time by like at least, sorry, I changed my location. I have a next meeting now. But nevertheless, I will ask to send those questions to our speakers so that we can have a sustained discussion, and it will all be on our site. And please, one more thing. As we've discussed in the very beginning, we've been talking about continuity of our engagement with the BRICS and the importance of the Russian-India cooperation within this format and as it is. And please make sure that you participate in our Still BRICS process. We are having a series of online roundtables on all and a variety of topics. Yes, and here you see in chat their site, which where you can join and offer your recommendations. And I'm still keeping some slight hope that we can arrange for a face-to-face meeting in September or October this year, and the dates will be also put on the site. And we're looking forward to very fruitful engagement. And yes, India remains a very important partner for us and most trusted friend. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.